Hello, my name's Nick Harris. I'm a UK-based illustrator working mostly in children's publishing. Today we're going to tackle a dummy cover for a book that doesn't exist. We're going to make it up. And so the first thing to do is set up an appropriate page size. So unticking the original aspect box there, as you saw I just did, I'm going to turn it into a portrait format because that's what I'm thinking. And do a smallish book. We'll do a standard size, which is A5, which is half A4. So A5 is 150 by 210 millimeters. So make the height 210, and then open the dialogue again in Edit. This is where I've got it from the front, and then keeping the original aspect box ticked this time, I'm going to bump it up to 150%. Why do I do that? Because in professional publishing, people often ask me to do it larger than actual size, because then it increases the level of detail, the apparent level of detail when it's reduced. Remember to compensate for that when you're putting it through your printer. Do fit to page. Right. Now we're in classic mode at the moment, but I want to work in docking mode because that keeps the screen clearer, gives us more room to work. So click docking mode there. And you see most of the little pallets disappear and you're just left with a bar at the top. But all the tools are there. As you scroll along them, you'll see the tool tips pop up, let you know what is where. There are the tools. That's the tool picker. There they all are. Everything's there for you. And you can get to your presets as well through there. But what I will do, after I set up the layers, which I'm doing now, I'm narrating this after the fact, which is why it might sound a bit fumbled. If you tear off the pallets, you can dock them to the side, so they're not floating about getting in the way. So that's what I've done with the layers palette. I opened the layers palette, hovered over that symbol at the side, and now it's docked it there. Now we'll go to the toolbox panel, which is what I started to talk about earlier. I have one prepared from earlier, but which is just all my favourite presets in. Now you can do this for yourself. They're very simple to set up. You literally open up the toolbox or the presets, and you'll find an option in there in the drop down menu to add to toolbox, and then you start loading your toolbox like that, and you can even put colour samples in, as you can see at the bottom, like that. So you can have your favourite colours there to get you started. It saves you a lot of time and faffing about. Now I'm adding a couple of layers just to get started, and the lower one, to get rid of the stark white, which I don't want, I'm going to fill using the bucket tool with like a warm yellow colour, just a tint, just to take the edge off the white. It helps to unify the picture if you do this. And what I will probably do later is do the same thing with a layer and put it over the top. Now obviously if the blend mode was normal, you wouldn't be able to see through that, but I will set the blend mode to something called multiply, which that means it's like adding a wash of watercolor or a tint over it. And now let's get down to it. On a layer there, I'm just using the pencil tool. I like the fine line pencil. You use whatever tool you like. There's nothing definitive about this. This is just how I work. Everybody has their own way of working. Everybody likes different tools, likes to use them in a slightly different way. That's why we've got such variety in art. It's great, isn't it? It's not so much right and wrong, it's just different. So when you're watching this, just pick out the bits that apply to you. Don't think you have to do things this way. This is not definite. This isn't hard and fast. This is just how I do things. I'm just sketching away here, And each of those figures, the idea is to do a group of 5 figures. It's ArtRage 5. It's the ArtRage 5. So I'm going to do 5 figures in sort of heroic-y poses, all sort of having a bonding session, putting their hands on what will probably be some sort of giant pencil or something. And I'm drawing each figure on an individual layer so that I can move them around if I want to adjust them, rather than having to redraw everything all the time. Again, it's another time-saving thing. You see, that's what I'm doing just there. The figures at the front, which I have made the smaller figures so you can see the figures at the back, otherwise they'd be blocking them. And you can also group now, which is much better, which means you can move everything across. It was all moving a bit to the right, which I didn't want. I wanted it more central. With covers, you often want a strong image that's dynamic and grabbing. It can be a strong diagonal, but if it's not, quite often you just go for central placement. Bit dull, but it works for covers. Strong composition is more important in covers than it is in internal artworks. Again, moved very slightly there. We're actually not seeing live capture here. What we are seeing is a series of still JPEGs, because if I did live capture, I'd have to speed it up so much you wouldn't see anything anyway. So you'll learn more, I think, or you'll see more by me doing a series of JPEG captures, and then I'm just blending them one into the other. And as you can see, I'm just refining the drawing somewhat as I go. But you'll also notice that behind each layer of drawing, I've added a layer where I've just blocked in a plain colour with a solid light colour that I can work over. I did that with the pastel tools. I like the pastels and the chalks for blocking in, but you could use paint or whatever to do that. Again, up to you. You might want to just work straight in on one layer. Some people work fantastically on one layer. If you were working in real media, that's what you'd be doing. But I'm a watercolorist, so I think in layers. In the real world, I paint with watercolors. That's not to say I don't use solid colours as well. And I just move the whole group up again, and as you can see, the drawing has progressed a bit. I made this particular type in another program just because it was quicker for me, but we will do some type in this program as well, in ArtRage, because it can do type. Now an important and helpful feature on each layer in the layers palette is there's a little icon for a padlock, which means you can lock. It gives you an option to lock various things, and I've locked the transparency of the layer so that then I can go back in and work over it with a different colour, and it won't move. It won't go over the edges. Saves you loads of time. Now I hope you can see that's not what's happening with this layer, which is a layer set to multiply blend mode, and I'm using the watercolor tool to lay down some tone to add a bit of volume to the figures. And I want to make sure I get to the edges on these, right over the edges on these. So rather than using the padlock to lock the layer transparency, I'm just painting and then tidying up later with the eraser as I go. And then also using the eraser to add details in. You don't have to be so accurate with the brush, because you can always go back in and cut away with the eraser, as you can see is going on there. That's quite hard to do in real media, but in digital you can do this kind of thing. Brilliant. This is a technique I use a lot. As I said, a watercolorist in the real world, so I like using translucent washes over the top to add shadow and colour and all sorts of stuff like that. And if you're using the palette knife as well, you can really soften edges. You have a lot more tight control than you do in real media, which is a plus and a minus, because you get happy accidents in real media that you don't get quite so much of in digital, because as I said, you have that much more control. So I carry on building up form using the watercolor tool. It's one of my favourite tools. I may do that on more than one layer, but at the moment I think I'm just working on one, refining little details here and there, bringing things out. And remember we talked about text. Well, I've introduced a little bit at the bottom, but I think I want to move it to the top, so that's what I do with the transform tool after I've written the text, and I think it looks better up there. It keeps their feet free, a little less cluttered. That's just a design thing. It's a personal taste thing where you put type, unless you're instructed by the publisher, if you're working for a publisher. Zooming in, you can see it's still looking pretty tatty. The drawing isn't refined, the line is really woolly. You can see what a mess the group of hands is. I haven't worked that out yet at all. When you're working on separate layers, I will put another layer over the top to try and work out the hands, because they're all part of that. That would be up to you, how you quite work out, if you're working with more than one layer, how you designate what you put on what layer. Depends how your own particular mind works. But apart from the hands, mostly it's making a lot more sense now. The image, you can see what the figures are sort of aimed towards being, even if they're not very well refined. So let's zing it up with some colour, shall we? I will now start blocking in some of there's flat colours on the layers behind. I'll start with a figure at the back and then and work round. Now I'm thinking in terms of a rainbow of colours, but obviously there's only 5 characters and we normally base our rainbow colours on 7, but I will cobble that and have sort of combinations of colours. That's sort of indigo violet for the lady at the back, variations on those colours. Excuse me, tickly cough. Giving her a long sort of Doctor Who-like scarf, not as sort of bright or patterned colours as that, but it just helps break up the shape a bit, makes it a little bit more interesting. I'm trying to make the characters all look kind of arty. Also thinking in terms of them being slightly fantasy, which is like the character on the left is slightly elfin, the girl in the skirt is slightly more sort of fairy-like in proportion, although she might just be a young girl. And now we're moving on to the figure of the chap on the right. I'm thinking sort of red and sort of red going towards orange, so I will base his clothes colours on those, with a sort of orangey waistcoat and a darker red coat I'll go for. I'm not being too careful, I'm blocking it in, but I'm not being that careful. It will need tidying up. But this is, as I said before, this is just how I work. You don't have to work like this. But I have, for this, locked the layer transparency with a little padlock, just so it keeps those edges tidy. Sorry about that. For some reason I leant on a button that starts off my CD writer, so that's why that ghosted in for a second there. Ignore. Sort of dark red, a rich red, sort of almost like a wine red for his jacket. That'll give me the chance to bring in some nice sort of brighter red highlights. And you see how the solid colour is working quite nicely with the shade layer over the top. I've popped across to the other side to the sort of elfin figure, which would be the blues before you get to indigo and violet. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The rainbow colours, which then makes the fairy-ish character sort of yellowy green, and then the more dwarfen character will be orangey yellow. I've blobbed. I wanted a bit more pattern than just a sort of plain scope, make it feel a bit more chiffony, a bit lighter, or also a bit like petals or leaves. That's a bit too light, that didn't show up. Putting a yellow base down to his jacket, but that's not going to be warm enough at all. That's more like it, kind of in betweeny. And He's not wearing a skirt. That is supposed to be a sort of a proper sort of full apron going around, a bit like a butcher or a blacksmith or something like that would wear. I'm stereotyping the sort of fantasy sort of dwarf figure, and I'm not being completely strict, because you see the colours on the trousers at the chap at the back are much more sort of a sort of yellowy orange, so I'm kind of a bit of a crossover going on there. As I said, it's very loose, the idea of the rainbow, but I just thought it would kind of tie in with the idea of art and light and all that stuff. And I'm moving around onto all the figures, working on all the figures, so that I can get an idea of what the whole thing is going to look like. And I'll just go around and tidying up, adding little highlights here and there, trying to crisp up edges, bring things up. There's a lot of fiddling goes on the way I work. You're just picking out more details, a sort of scarf tied around the guy's neck. I will sort of add things as I go. You let the picture speak to you. If as you're filling things in, you notice that it seems to have a bit of a hole somewhere, consider putting something in there. Digital allows you to do that. You can add things after the fact, which are much harder to do in real media. Yeah, I'm thinking about having her have green hair, but I'll probably just go with dark. And in fact, I will probably make her skin darker as well. Wasn't really thinking when I did this. I was thinking of everyone with sort of pinky white or pinky white skin, but no, that's not. It'd be nice to have a character with darker skin. Again, you can still go around tidying up edges here and there. Do things as you spot them sometimes, like that. Otherwise you'll end up having, the further you get before you tidy up some things, it can get a bit more difficult. You see, I'm making this character, this elephant character, fairly pale skinned. That's a sort of cold pinky colour I'm using as the base for that, and I will warm it up with details around the features like the nose and the eyes. And at the moment I'm doing this fairy character with a light skin, but I will put a wash over her later to darken, just try and work out some of the tones, some of the sort of skin tones first. That said, black skin and white skin do have decidedly different colours in them. You can do if you're going really dark skin. So look at some reference for sort of skin colours. As you see, I've got the layer locked and unlocked in between when I'm sort of doing things. When I want a crisp edge, I will put the little padlock on again, and I've darkened her skin up a bit and given her a little more form, and to her hair as well. It's still pretty crude. If ever I zoom in, you'll see it's still very crude. We're back to fading JPEGs again, which is why it seems to bump as we're moving along. It's not moving so smoothly. Added another layer of tone, which is up on the right there. Now I'm going to tackling something different. I was considering having number 5 radiating out from the middle, and I hoped I'd be able to do it using the text tool and the use symmetry, paint symmetry there. But I found out, I consulted as well with Ambient to make sure of this, you can't actually use it directly in paint symmetry. You can paint into sections like this, but you can't do it with type. I hoped I'd just be able to do that. Just playing with some of the controls. You can change the number of axes of symmetry, and you can have an odd number. But to do that, you must turn off a mirrored symmetry. Being a bit dim, it took me a while to spot that, what I was doing wrong there. I wanted 5 again because of the ArtRage 5 thing going on. 555. But you can drag the axis of symmetry there around, and you don't have to have that on show, that little icon in the middle. You can turn that off. But to get around it, what I do is I create the type, make it bigger, move it around, The other thing is with transform, you can't do on active type layers, you can't do irregular transform. So what I will have to do is I will have to rasterize it. That's turn it into pixels, and that's easy enough to do. I'll get to it in a minute. I'm just placing it a bit better. I will make a layer underneath, and then I will just collapse it, merge the layer down to it, and that rasterize. You can just rasterize it direct, but I like to do it that way. It's quite quick. And now you have the ability to be able to transform irregularly, because I want some sort of perspective going on with it, you see. And then if you duplicate that layer, then drag it around with the transform tool, then just I'm using the symmetry thing there as a guide. So even though you can't directly use the type with it, you can use it as a guide anyway. In this particular case, there are often you can often work out ways round things when you get stumped. Just carrying on here, going all the way around. Make it bendy. Now I don't really want it bending. Just adjusting it, and then I'll do that again once more. There we go, just to do the last one, and that's one ring of 5s. Then I will collapse all those. I'll bring them all together and then collapse all those layers, merge them all together. I could put them into a group and then merge the group, but I'm just doing it a layer at a time. That's what you're seeing happening there. And then by locking the layer, then I can add colour to them. But then remember then I want to blur them a bit. And if I've got the transparency locked, that will affect the blurring. So I don't want to do that. So anyway, I repeat that a number of times, and you can end up with a thing like that. I may or may not have this turned on at the end. It's just an idea. Quite nice, something sort of ghosted over the top. Do lots of layers, and then lock them to make a sort of rainbow colory effect on it, and then blur them. We're back to transforming JPEGs again. This is after I've turned a radiating rainbow colour from the centre there, and then using the palette knife, create like a blurry effect. See, it's a bit like makes it like a sort of special effect then. Woo! You can do special effects as well. You can hand paint special effects. I've turned it off because obviously it's in the way of what I'm trying to do here. You can see I've blocked in a lot more of the skin tones now. It's making sort of more sense. There's more value to the tones. There's a shadow between the dwarf and the sort of fairy character. That's her with darker hair. I said I was thinking about a pencil in the middle, but now I've put a pencil there using the bright colours. But I don't particularly like it. It's a bit bleh. So I'll probably get rid of that. And as you can see, I've worked on the fairy skin tone a bit, and then laying a darker tone over it. Still kind of work. It'll need more work than that to make it work. And her back looks a bit of a funny shape. Her shoulder nearly works, but her back is a bit of a funny shape, sticking out a bit much. And the hands, I've worked on the hands a bit more here. So they're a little bit more defined. And the sludgy background colour, which was just there as a tool, so I could see the colours more easily, the light colours when I was using more easily. I've got rid of some of that, which already makes it much more dynamic looking. And now I want to load a different toolbox to use for a while, one with some textural brushes that I've made in the new brush designer. But I also want to keep the colours that I'm using in this one, and you can transfer them across by exporting the colour samples, as you see me doing here, and naming them, save them somewhere you know where they're going to be. Then when you load your other toolbox, which I'm now doing, and go to add samples, you can import that colour set so it matches what you've been doing. There we are. picking it where I've saved it, and there it is. But if you want to keep it for future use, if you're going to close and reopen this a few times, you'll need to either do that every time or save the toolbox with those colour samples to save you time. See? Simple as that. Anyway, let's have a dabble about, see what these brushes look like. I'm going on the ground plane and just sort of mottling it up a bit. The colour I'm using is that same sort of neutrally brown, but you can see because of the colour variation settings you're getting pinks and greens and all sorts of offset hues, which I don't know if I'll keep this, but I'm just playing with it at the moment. What else? Let's have another look at some of these. Oh yes, that's one of the ones that looks a bit more like sort of organic things flying about. That's again sticking with that same fawn colour, but you've got the same colour variation on them. I think I've kept that in a lot of the brushes. How about if we pick one of the colours off the character and have it sort of floating away behind, trying to make it more sort of magical. Again, we're talking in terms of special effects. You don't have to use these brushes for special effects. You can just make all sorts of really nice painterly brushes. I just happen to have done these using slightly different brush heads, and now I'm picking colours off the different characters and sort of making some brush strokes behind them. The characters at the front, if this stuff is drifting off the back, would be in front of everything. So that's just seeing what that layer is. That's the original layer of 5s, which I copied and then softened. Copied it in case I needed it again. Now picking the colour off the fairy character. You can see trailing out that way. It's quite nice. I don't know. It's making it all quite confusing. It's a bit of a mess. It's quite interesting. Makes it very rich. Picking the yellow colour. Orangey colour, which looks almost the same as the green. There's too much green in it really. Looks too greeny. Yeah, interesting. Don't know if I'll keep it, but it's interesting. Yeah, I'm not meaning interesting in a good way, but I'll keep trying. I'll push it forward a bit further, just in case. I'll try some other things in the background. Thinking kind of organic tendrils. Yes, it's getting weirder. Organic tendrils. It's going to look a bit like they're stood in the middle of an anemone in a minute. But really I'm thinking in terms of pattern, sort of implying things behind them. Nothing too specific, but kind of organic. So I'm painting with the white pastel on a layer behind. On the layer, actually it's the layer that's introduced the white in the background. I'm painting on that layer, using the fawn colour to introduce fawn fronds to continue the pattern, sort of bridge that gap in the middle. Still have the same problem. It's just too busy, isn't it? Busy. What did I say about keeping it simple? Covers need to be instantly recognisable if you're going to attract people to the bookshelf, draw people to it. So I'll try something different. I've picked the number 5. We're back on ArtRage 5 again. Using the type tool, I'm going to change the font. You can scroll through the however many fonts you've got on your system. You can either do it using the slider at the side, or you can use the up and down arrows, and then they're previewed at the top. You can see them like that in the window at the top under where it says select font. Now I've picked a simple one because I'm planning to duplicate it 4 more times, so there's 5 of them. To see the theme here, and then arrange them in some sort of pattern so it looks like a sort of logo or some sort of emblem. Hopefully not a swastika, although that used to be the sign of peace in the going the other way many years ago. I'm just rotating it. I'm not being accurate, I'm doing it sort of by eye. I'll either try and arrange them in a ring or over one another, but I'm just rotating them and sort of playing around, just thinking on the fly, which tends to be my way to go. As I said, you don't have to do this. You can sit down, you can plan it all out. I just sort of do things as I go. Yes, I moved that blue line, which I didn't mean to. That guide. You can lock them. I just forgot to do that. What shall I do? What shall I do? I might try and arrange them, as I said, in a ring. Yes, if I arrange the 4 like that and with the other one in the middle, I think might work better. Yeah. Yeah, then I put the other one in the middle. But it's not going to fit, so I'm going to scale it down a little bit. Try and get it so it's just touching, scaling it and moving it so it's just touching each of the other 4 5s. Now I will group those. I've made a group, and then I drag each layer into it. Just check, and I turn it on and off to make sure that they're all in there. Then I duplicate the group. I give it a name. And now I can move them around, you see. And also I will flatten those into one. I flattened them into one layer, because then I can paint on them, because text layers aren't pixel layers, so you can't paint on them. And now I'm adding a ring around it, and I might add another one in the middle. Use the stencil for that, and just scale it slightly so that it looks a bit tidier. Now I've duplicated that, and I'm scaling that. The duplicate down, and putting that around the middle. And then I will merge those layers, so that's the one layer as well. Then I can move it all together. Now I've dragged it down, but if you'll notice, just at the bottom, it's gone off the edge of the page, and I do find that clips the image. And then when I scale it down, I'm about to discover, look, I've lost the bottom curve. So I'll do some Control Z, Control Z if you're an American, and go back to there and then scale it up there. And another thing you'll notice in Transform is I haven't ticked, there's a box that says scale with perspective. You can scale the contents with perspective, and I didn't do that, and it wasn't working for it. It looked a bit distorted. But now I have ticked that, the contents, the whole thing works better in perspective. So keep an eye on that if you're scaling shapes. And that's where I'll place it. Because I've ticked the padlock to lock the colour, I'm just playing with the idea of putting colours on it, but no, I won't do that. Instead, I'll make it a neutral dark colour, and then I will distort it a little bit more to fit in with the perspective and drop it beneath all the characters. That means just dragging the layer down. And now I've used the magic wand to pick out bits of the text at the top, and then I've filled it in with green and made it look like it's got a little bit of form to it. I just think that lifts it more. And I've also added a green tinge to the fairly naff colour at the bottom, the sort of neutral colour. Needed a bit more life. And now, using a custom brush made in the brush designer, I'm adding a bit of grassy texture. At the moment I'm working behind the characters, but to make it sit inside I'll need to do another layer with some grass on it, where it just overlaps the shoes and things like that, to make it look like they're actually standing in the grass as opposed to stuck on top of it. A little sort of love and attention to make that work more. I've added a layer above where the chaps, the chaps placed. I called his layer warrior. I mean, remember they were based on sort of fantasy ideas. And now you can see I'm just overlapping some strokes above his shoes, so that he is behind them. His shoes are behind them. His shoes are behind them. Front. I made two different very similar brushes for grass, so that I could add bits of variation, so it wasn't too mechanical looking. Make as many as you like. The program now comes with a lot of onboard custom brushes made that you can play with, but it's very easy to make your own. I think there'll be a little video about it. Nothing too deep. Meanwhile, there was something fundamentally wrong with the dwarf's hand. It just didn't look right. So I've tweaked that a bit and I've turned it round, and now it's like that. The knuckles facing out more. And for the sake of this particular demonstration, I probably won't do too much more. I've added a bit of mist kind of over the grass to fade it to the back a bit, and I've reintroduced those fives emanating from the centre, because they don't, without all the other stuff, they don't look too bad, I suppose. And I'll just massage a few bits here and there, and then that'll be it. Okay, so I hope you get something out of this, and I will catch you next time. Bye!